In this tutorial, we look at another method of placing things on the page, and we're going to look this time at kind of the three main components of a page. And sorry, I jumped ahead a little bit here and put a menu on. So if you're following things in order, you might go up and look at the navigation section, see about the menu. But most web pages have an area up here. We have a logo and a header. Then they have a menu that might go across the bottom. If it's horizontal menu, go underneath here, or the menu might appear here on the left, and then the content will appear here. So let's look at a page, just kind of show you where things might end up. So if we run this, kind of see the normal page layout. You see this all over the place. We'll have the heading up here, our menus here, and then our content here. So our content, as we saw last time, is in a content comes from the combination of the master page and the content page. So it's the content placeholder that we actually want to place on the master page. The same things, we're going to have a set of menus that we want to place. So, how do we do this? How do we create this kind of layout in a master page? So, last time we looked at doing this absolute positioning. And with absolute positioning, I can place things inside panels and then place those panels wherever I want to put them on the page. And that's okay for some, well, it's one way of performing layout, and it's not a bad way. And if you don't really know what you're doing, that's probably a good way to do it. But here's another way that we can perform layout. So what I'm going to do is grab this menu. We can see the things we have on the page are the header that's up here, this H1 header. And I'm actually going to then place the menu underneath that. And then we have, I did this with a div rather than with a panel on this one. But it's the same thing. You can see on this div, I used position absolute and then placed its left and its top to position this one on the page. The menu is just in the normal flow, and again, if you know HTML, that makes sense. So the menu is going to appear underneath the heading and over on the left. But let's do this now. Let's add a little bit of positioning on this guy. I'm going to give it a div and give it an ID of the menu div. And I'm going to wrap this div around my menu. And then up in the style sheet section of the page, well, I guess I need to add a style sheet section. So up here in the head, I'm going to add a style section. And inside there, then use the selector for the ID selector for the menu div to select that one and place some rules on that. And then what I'm going to do to this guy is I'm just going to float him to the left. And we'll see what effect that has here in a second. Then the other thing I'm going to do is take this div and get rid of the style stuff out of here, and I'm going to give this guy an ID of content div. And up here, I'm going to float up here in the style section. I'm going to do pretty much the same thing, but I'm going to float that guy to the right. So rather than menu div, I'm going to call this one content div. And what floating says to do is take an object that would normally in the normal flow and float it to whatever margin we specify. So what this is going to do is take my menu and float it over to the left margin, which, look at this in design view, this is the left margin over here, and then my content placeholder, which you kind of see the little box over here, is floated over to the right. So let's take a look at this. We'll see it looks a little funky right now. But if we run this with this new layout in the master page, we see it's kind of done what I want it to do. It's floated my menu to the left and floated my content placeholder to the right. But what I really want to do now to make this work and to build a layout is I want to constrain the width on these guys. So the other thing I'm going to do is come in here to the source, and I'm going to put another big div around the outside of this whole thing. So this is kind of more normal cascading style sheet HTML layout. So I'm going to give this to give an idea of, sorry, I forgot my quote, main wrapper, and I'm going to wrap this around everything on my page. So I'm going to take that close div and put it down here just before the close body. And now in this main wrapper, again I'm going to use the pound to say choose the ID, main wrapper. I'm going to set a width on this guy to however wide I want this to be. And I'm setting it to 760 pixels, and we can have some discussion about this, whether that's a good width or not. But I'm basically saying I'm assuming that most people are going to view this web page at 800 pixels, but I'm going to account for scroll bars and sidebars and things like that and leave myself a little room because I don't want people to scroll horizontally. But anyway, let's take a look at what this does for our layout. And the other thing I want to do on this content div then is set a width on him. So on our menu, let's see, I actually want to set widths on our two boxes that are inside here too. So my menu, I don't think I've set a width on him. We'll set a width on that box. We'll set the width on him to, I'm going to set 120 pixels. And again, we can discuss whether we should use pixels or ems or whatever, but I'm just doing this quickly. And so my whole layout is 760 pixels. If I set this guy to 120 pixels, well, 760 minus 120 is 640. So you'd think I'd set the width on this guy to 640 pixels, which would be fine, except they would butt up against each other. So I'm going to set this to like 620 pixels. So we have a little margin between the two, and that also gives me some space to have some padding and things on the sides of these guys. But let's take a look at this now when we run this. You see where by setting the width, well, my computer science setting's too tall now, but what that's done is I do not have to absolute position these guys. They're floated, and actually take a look at it here. They're floated next to each other, and but I didn't have to do absolute positioning. So again, that's using floats to do the basic layout. And again, well, I apologize if you haven't taken my CSS classes and HTML classes, but just kind of a standard way of doing layouts. So we'll come back and look at one more trick with this in the next tutorial.